Playing video games is pretty much my all-time favorite hobby. I love a variety of different games for many different reasons. I enjoy platforming around vibrant, colorful worlds with excellent level design and movement just as much as I enjoy fighting the highly advanced Covenant army with tactical thinking and strategic gameplay. I have as much fun facing down an armada of creatively made bosses with satisfying weapons and special moves as I do solving cleverly constructed crimes as a rookie defense lawyer. And it makes me happy to see so many other people enjoying these phenomenal games just as much as I do. But there's one game I love with all my heart that doesn't get anywhere near the attention and praise that it deserves. Dragon's Lair 3D: Return to the Lair. The original Dragon's Lair was groundbreaking. Utilizing Laserdisc technology, the game presented players with what was essentially a playable short film. The premise was simple. You play as a bumbling knight trying to rescue Princess Daphne from the Dragon's Lair, navigating treacherous obstacles and dangerous enemies along the way. At certain moments throughout the game, you would have to decide which direction Dirk should move, or if he should draw his sword and attack. A correct move progresses the story, and an incorrect move leads Dirk to one of many deaths. This game took the world by storm. During a time when the most graphically advanced arcade games were things like Pac-Man, Galaga, and Dig Dug, seeing something as visually stunning as Dragon's Lair was mind-blowing to everyone who played it. It was the product of genius minds collaborating together to craft something revolutionary. Animators Don Bluth, Gary Goldman, and John Pomeroy combined their skill sets with video game designer Rick Dyer to create an arcade game that was leaps and bounds ahead of where the industry was at the time. Since then, the game has been re-released individually on every major gaming console ever made, as well as Steam, the App Store, and Google Play. It was packaged as a part of a trilogy on all current-gen consoles. It spawned a sequel as well as a separate game of similar style. It's getting a feature-length movie at some point in the next century. It even had a brief showcase in the second season of Stranger Things.
I hate this overpriced.
And the reason why this scene even exists in the first place is because everyone who's old enough to have spent their summers in the arcade in the 80s remembers Dragon's Lair. It made a name for itself, not only as the first Laserdisc arcade game, but one with the production value of a Hollywood movie. And thanks to the re-releases, there's a very good chance the average person will know what Dragon's Lair is, even if they've never played it before. But that is not the case for the biggest thing that was made as a result of Dragon's Lair's success. On November 17, 2002, Dragon's Lair 3D: Return to the Lair was released on PC, with Xbox and GameCube versions releasing shortly afterwards, and a PlayStation 2 version that was exclusive to Europe for some reason. And players were greeted with the same fun characters and mesmerizing environments they fell in love with nearly 20 years prior. The game was a fully 3D adventure where you were in complete and total control of Dirk at all times. And yet, in stark contrast to the original game's breakout success, it seems that almost nobody knew about this game back then, and even fewer people know about it now. If you ask the average player about it, there is a very high chance that they will have absolutely no clue what you're talking about. And that is incredibly saddening, because this game is absolutely outstanding, and I always cite it as an example of a game being as close to perfect as is humanly possible. There was still definitely a very niche audience that did play it, but I just wish it had the same universal appreciation that my other favorite games have. And to be clear, Dragon's Lair was absolutely a major part of my childhood, and I have a myriad of fantastic memories associated with the franchise. However, those experiences are entirely separate from my reasons for praising this game as an example of near perfection. And so today, in an attempt to share this incredible game with more people, I'm going to analyze it as impartially as I possibly can and explain why Dragon's Lair 3D: Return to the Lair is an underrated masterpiece. To begin with, I want to break down why the story of this game works so well. At face value, the plot is rather simple. Sins the Dragon has kidnapped Princess Daphne and locked her away in a dangerous and foreboding castle. You play as Dirk the Daring, who has once again been tasked with the mission of rescuing the princess all by himself, and to do so he must make his way through the castle's various tricks and traps. His only guiding voice throughout this adventure is Daphne herself, who is able to communicate with Dirk through the amulet left behind where she was kidnapped. In a hostile environment with danger around every corner, her voice is always there as a sign of reassurance when you need it. Whether faced with an unfamiliar foe or a magical new object, or even if she just notices something small you may not have, Daphne's always on the other end of the amulet, ready and able to help you navigate the castle and bring her home safe and sound. This premise is all an action-adventure game's plot needs to work. You don't necessarily have to tell a super complicated story for a game to succeed. That's not to diminish the quality of games with both well-written stories and engaging gameplay. Some of my favorite games of all time do this flawlessly. But unless you're making a visual novel or something similar to it, it's not a strict requirement to have a super complex story. In Dragon's Lair 3D, a basic plot justifies the gameplay, and you never lose sight of your objective as Daphne guides you along your adventure. Every action you take in this castle, be it fighting enemies, solving puzzles, or seeking powerful essences, is done with the ultimate purpose of slaying the dragon and rescuing the princess.
Treasure hunting? I'm in apparel? And you're collecting gold?
Well, almost every action. I could end the story section of the video right here. We have a simple plot to facilitate the gameplay, and that's all that's really required to immerse you into this world. But it doesn't stay this simple forever, and in fact, there are major revelations that begin to unfold around the halfway point, which fundamentally shift the context of this game's events and how the story plays out. So, if anything you've seen so far from the background gameplay has intrigued you enough to experience this for yourself, then I strongly encourage you to skip to this timestamp. But, if you already know what I'm referring to, then allow me to break down why this game's two major plot twists work so well. Your objective from the start of the game is simple. Reach the dragon's lair, slay the dragon, and rescue Princess Daphne. As such, I think I can say with absolute confidence that every player who reached the dragon's lair was under the impression that they had reached the end of the game. After all, they were about to face off against the final boss and accomplish their objective. According to the menu, you could potentially have collected all 71 out of 71 treasures, and the essences you currently possess form nice triangular shapes together in your amulet. And as the cherry on top, this triumphant musical score plays in the background as Dirk and Daphne walk away victorious. There is absolutely no reason for the player to think that there's anything left to do before the credits roll. And yet, last chance for a spoiler warning before things get really crazy.
Well, I must say I had you going there for a while, didn't I?
The game pulls the rug out from under you and reveals that the person you fought tooth and nail to save was not, in fact, Princess Daphne, but rather Hollow, a shapeshifter who was captured by the dragon while attempting to steal the magic sword for himself, and has thus impersonated Daphne to manipulate you into helping him escape. Hollow, alongside the other bosses you fought against, is a guardian of one of the dragon's powerful essences. Essences which were all that remained of the evil wizard Mordroc after he was banished into a different dimension for murdering a wizard in cold blood to obtain and use those essences to rule the kingdom. But this power caused tensions to grow between those guardians before they ultimately split apart from each other to protect the essence that mattered most to them. The Bat King took the wings, the Goliaths captured the spirit, the Cyclops held onto the eyes, and now Hollow has control of the scales and plans to use the magic sword to take back the remaining essence so he can control them all. And the only person standing in the way of that goal is you. Hollow provides a simple backstory for the major bosses you faced off against up until this point, adding even more narrative context to the gameplay, as well as making several seemingly insignificant references to Mordroc that will end up paying off later down the line. But these things aren't what make this scene so great, because as you sit here trying to wrap your mind around this reveal, you ultimately realize the most unsettling truth about the situation. Daphne is still out there somewhere, and if she wasn't being held captive in the dragon's lair, then where is she? Furthermore, this reveal recontextualizes every instance in which Daphne ever spoke to you prior to this point. When I mentioned that she serves as your guiding voice throughout the game, you may have found it strange that Singe, Daphne's captor, would let her assist Dirk in trying to reach the dragon's lair and not just take the amulet away. But now that you freed Hollow, you were led to believe that all those voices were coming from him in an effort to deceive you, and that you never really had a friend at any point during your quest. Until this happens.
Dirk, that shapeshifter's magic kept me from assisting you. But he's gone now.
So, Hollow wasn't the one who was trying to deceive you with the amulet. Daphne was still the one trying to communicate with you, and she was just interrupted somehow. Right? That's what the voice wants you to believe for the second half of your adventure, but now that you've been tricked by this once already, you aren't so eager to fall for it again. The game lulled you into a sense of security that Daphne was the one person you could rely on to help you reach the dragon's lair. What was once a guaranteed voice of reassurance while surrounded by deadly traps and enemies has now been permanently tarnished and replaced by a feeling of uncertainty and unease whenever her words echo through your amulet. That is the most successful part of this plot twist. The fact that it causes you to doubt the truth of your mission. Is it truly Daphne trying to assist you and she was just interrupted before? Or is this yet another deception that you haven't become privy to? You no longer have a clear idea of where you're going or what your final destination is, nor do you have a definitively friendly voice to help you figure that out, which makes navigating the dark hallways of the castle even more unsettling. Then, after you've retrieved the final essence and are about to obtain a new type of arrow for your crossbow, Daphne says this. If there was any part of you that previously held out hope that Daphne was really the one talking to you, that hope has now been utterly eviscerated. You now know with absolute certainty that whoever's on the other end of this amulet is not Daphne. You don't have all the information yet, but you have realized that the voice is not to be trusted and that they are afraid of the magic arrow. You've been strung along for some greater purpose, and the only way to get to the bottom of it is to keep pressing on and find the source of this voice. Then, after fighting your way through the toughest set of trials in the entire game, you arrive at the portal room. At this point in the game, you have successfully cleared out the entire castle room by room and have still found no trace of Daphne. This is the last room you can possibly explore, and all it has to offer is a wide open central area and 2 mana cell stands. But upon placing the mana cells where they belong, something remarkable happens. A portal rises out of the ground, causing the entire room to crumble to pieces as parts of the floor are sent flying in every direction. And in one final line of dialogue from Daphne, one desperate attempt to reach out for your help, She finally tells you that she is trapped inside the portal. The question is, why? Why did Daphne direct you through all these different rooms to collect these essences when she was never in the castle at all? Why did she ever lead you into the Dragon's Lair in the first place when she should have known all along that she wasn't there? Why did she so nonchalantly accept the fact that Dirk has been deceived by Hollow and pretend as if nothing had happened? Why did she give you all these instructions and send you on all these quests throughout the castle when she's been previously established to get frustrated when you do things unnecessary to her rescue, and all this time the only thing she needed to do was just to tell you that she had been banished to a different dimension? Oh my god. It is at last revealed as you arrive in this alternate dimension that the evil wizard Mordroc has been the mastermind behind all the game's events. He's been trapped in this dimension all this time, but when he finally found an opportunity to go home and finish what he started, he took advantage of it. He orchestrated Daphne's kidnapping and impersonated her with the use of the amulet to trick Dirk into doing his dirty work. He used Dirk to eliminate every boss who wronged Mordroc, retrieve every one of those essences he sought after so long ago, and even hand-deliver them directly to Mordroc himself. And as the cherry on top, the game never actually told you that Daphne was being held in the Dragon's Lair. That's an assumption you leapt to as a player because of the events of the first game, and because of this shot revealing the castle. But from the very first cutscene of the game, they deliberately show you that Daphne was taken through a portal to a different dimension where Mordroc was waiting for her, but you never gave it a second thought until this very moment. This moment, when all the puzzle pieces fall into place and you finally understand what's been happening this entire time, is what makes this story work so well, even in spite of its simple premise. You've been led to question your faith in your vocal companion several times over after being initially deceived, but even with that unsettling feeling of mistrust in the back of your mind, you still had no confirmation of what was going on until this very moment. This final battle works because while Mordroc may have outsmarted you and stolen back his essences, you have one more piece of information he failed to account for. When faced with an armada of fire-breathing dragons, transcendental ghoulies, lightning-fast thorns, and many more dangerous foes, the voice in the amulet was only ever afraid of one thing: the magic arrow, the only item powerful enough to defeat the wizard at his strongest. Mordroc's fatal flaw is still in your possession, but in his desire to restore his power with the essences, he made a crucial mistake and it would ultimately lead to his downfall. After he is weakened by the magic arrow, true to the name of the game, he uses the last of his strength to transform into a mighty dragon. Surely if he couldn't beat Dirk as a wizard, then he could certainly strike him down as a dragon with electrified breath. But he is proven wrong once again, as Dirk, having overcome every obstacle thrown his way and managing to survive even in spite of the constant deception from whom he thought was his only ally, masters the 6 essences with the power of the magic sword. And this bumbling knight is now finally able to stand strong in front of one final monster and finish his mission: to slay the dragon and rescue Princess Daphne. Dirk was able to discover the secret of the essences and use every skill in his arsenal to not only slay every evil monster who stood in his way, but also permanently banish Mordroc once and for all so he could never return again. And so, finally, after hours of navigating the castle's tricks and traps, he is finally able to take a moment to relax and celebrate his victory with Daphne, as the game congratulates you for completing your mission and the credits start to roll. This game had no right to tell a story as engaging as this. Dragon's Lair's story was no more complicated than a knight trying to rescue a princess from a castle, and this game would have functioned just fine if its plot had also been that simple. But the developers went out of their way to add more depth to the backstory of these enemies from the first game. They made you question the reliability of Daphne's commentary as you figure out how to make your way through the castle, and they created a villain far more intimidating and cunning than a massive dragon. And to be clear, I'm not trying to say that this game has some ingenious or revolutionary story on par with Halo 2, The Walking Dead, or Portal 2, but it still provided more complexity in both the narrative and characters that hadn't been present in the original game, and it's truly astounding how well it all works together. And the narrative is supported by a solid voice cast. Dan Molina doesn't have much to do in terms of speaking since Dirk doesn't have a single line of dialogue throughout the entire game, but what he excels at is providing comical noises for the full array of Dirk's various actions. Dirk is meant to be a bumbling idiot of a knight throughout most of the game, so things like the dragon wing sound effect help to enhance his character in this way. The rest of the voice actors also provide vocals to match their characters very well. Daphne is credited with 2 voice actresses, Darcy Javier and Vera Pacheco. I'm not 100% positive about which lines each person contributed, but I think the former provided the voice for the in-game dialogue and tutorials, while the latter voiced Daphne during the 2D cutscenes, since she also voiced Daphne in the original arcade games. I don't know this for sure, but either way my assessment is the same. They both gave excellent performances in line with how Daphne spoke in the arcade game. Christopher Stone and Gary Goldman give the best performances as Hollow and Mordroc respectively. Hollow's voice is deep and booming, intimidating you with every syllable that leaves his mouth.
I tried to sneak into this little treasure room in search of that wonderful sword you're holding.
Aside from providing vocals that have you hanging on his every word, this foreboding voice perfectly falls in line with the nature of his malicious character. Mordroc's vocals, meanwhile, are that of a cold and calculating wizard.
I needed someone to eliminate all my enemies and reclaim the essences that were stolen from me. I certainly could not do it from this prison. And my dim-witted dragon Singe was certainly no help.
He doesn't have an inherently imposing voice like Hollow, but you can imagine him in a lab mixing potions together to begin casting spells upon his enemies while he plots out his master plan. The thing is, with the exception of Daphne, none of the characters have all that many lines of dialogue. Hollow and Mordrak only have 1 or 2 scenes each, and Dirk has no actual lines throughout the entire game. But when they do get a chance to speak, their dialogue is made so much more engaging thanks to the actors' deliveries. The story and character writing hold up well on their own, but the incredible performances from all these actors and actresses help to significantly enhance the impact of the dialogue. And speaking of elements of this game that are meant to enhance, the music and sound effects are both stellar. Whether it's the swinging of the sword, the firing of the crossbow, or the explosion of a barrel, the Foley work in this game strikes a perfect balance between conveying a cartoonish event and being impactful enough to feel like you really did something awesome. For instance, the crossbow does sound a little cartoonish. However, that style of sound effect falls perfectly in line with the tone of Dragon's Lair and doesn't take away the sense of satisfaction you get upon taking down an enemy. The music is even more impressive. Every track is beautifully orchestrated by Christopher Stone, who was also responsible for the music in the original Dragon's Lair, whether it's to create a sense of danger, help draw you into a mysterious environment, provide a fast-paced beat to accompany an intense battle, leading to a major confrontation, or make you feel an unparalleled sense of accomplishment upon finally mastering the power of the essences. There's a track for every occasion. There are some levels in the game where there's no music at all, but these sequences are typically in very dimly lit, spooky environments, which even further helps to improve the atmosphere. The silence is deafening as you creep through the caverns, and the only sounds you can hear are your own footsteps and the hissing of a deadly spider lurking somewhere in the darkness. The overall point here is the same. The soundtrack and the instances during which no music plays both accomplish one simple task: to immerse you into this world. It helps you feel like you're actually exploring this mysterious castle, fighting a mighty dragon, or witnessing something ominous happen before your eyes. Believe it or not, the original arcade game didn't have a whole lot of music. The most impactful track happens right at the very end as you're getting ready to face off against Singe the Dragon. At that point, your adrenaline is through the roof because you've come this far, and the slightest mistake could mean the difference between victory and defeat. So hearing this music play during the most important moment in the game helps to elucidate and intensify the tension you feel as you prepare to slay the dragon. But aside from that, much of the game was really quiet in terms of music, allowing you to concentrate solely on what was happening around you so you could focus on making the correct moves. But in Dragon's Lair 3D, you have total control of your character and infinite lives, so you aren't as on edge as you are during the arcade game. Because of this, the game wants you to enjoy your time in this castle and encourages you to stop and smell the roses, to explore these mystical environments and soak in the mesmerizing atmosphere which permeates the whole game. And yeah, the ending song lyrics is certainly a little, cheesy, to say the least. But the melody still provides a great feeling of satisfaction, a celebratory track to commemorate having successfully navigated the castle's various trials and tribulations. A game's soundtrack is a major contributor to its atmosphere and evoking certain emotions and feelings from the player. Driving the Warthog to escape an exploding ship is thrilling all by itself, but doing so feels much more intense when this music kicks in. You may already be mesmerized upon stepping out of the cave and into the daylight, but the music that plays here only helps to further elicit that reaction. This game's soundtrack is no exception when it comes to making you feel like a part of this world. Another major element that helps to pull you into the atmosphere is the art style. If you couldn't already tell from the footage I've shown thus far, the game is cel-shaded, and the purpose of this is to make the game look as close to the original as possible without actually making it 2D. Many games such as the Borderlands franchise, Batman the Telltale series, and The Walking Dead all use a variation of cel shading to give the illusion of playing a cartoon. And since the original Dragon's Lair was essentially a playable cartoon, this style does wonders for the game. Aside from helping immerse you into the world, it also helps the game withstand the test of time. It doesn't look like it's aged a day because the artists strive for a distinct art style. The thing about realism in games is that when you solely strive for realistic visuals, they will always become outdated in due time. But when you have a game like Cuphead or Bendy and the Ink Machine, those games' graphics will hold up much better over time because they're striving for a distinct art style. In contrast, games which solely strive to mimic reality will look gorgeous in the moment, but ultimately show their age at some point. This is not the case for games showcasing unique art styles because the quality of realism is determined by the limits of the current technology. The quality of this game's art, meanwhile, is a result of the creativity of the artists. They had an aesthetic they wanted to commit to, and they did so unflinchingly, and as a result, this game looks just as striking as it did in 2002. They weren't focused on dazzling the eye with hyper-realistic visuals, they were focused on creating a game with stylistic graphics that would withstand the test of time, and they succeeded in that endeavor. But even outside of the style itself, everything in this game is absolutely gorgeous. From the very very first shot of the game, the detail present in the skybox as well as the castle grab your attention immediately. Everything from the light shining in through the windows to the shimmering of a flame in the darkness to something as simple as the detail and the textures in the wall, all work together brilliantly to make you feel like you're a part of this environment. You feel a sense of awe as you approach the colossal castle, starting to fully grasp the scale of the adventure ahead. The orange color scheme and screen shakes all help create a feeling of danger as the fireballs come crashing down all around you. The fog effects and dim lighting make you feel alone and creeped out as you navigate the haunted hallways of the castle, especially during this sequence, when you're all alone and can see a ghost menacingly floating above you. And with your sword acting as your only source of light in the dark caverns, you can even feel a sense of fear as you hear the spiders creeping in the distance, but with no way to know for sure where exactly they are. You also never lose the desire to explore the castle due to the great amount of variety between all the levels. None of the rooms blend together because they all offer such a diverse array of visual theming and gameplay elements, which we'll be sure to cover soon. For context, the game is divided into sections based on which essence you're currently pursuing. For instance, in Pursuit of the Dragon Spirit, you navigate various spooky environments where searching for the Dragon Flame takes you through more industrial and mechanical looking environments in line with the statue-based enemies known as smithies, whose only weakness is fire. But even within these themed areas, the levels contrast themselves brilliantly while still maintaining the appropriate style. Each level in the Dragon Spirit section maintains a creepy atmosphere while taking you through a cramped hallway, open into platforming gauntlet and river section, fast-paced chase sequences, and frantic boss battles. It's impressive how well the game is able to balance diverse theming along with visually stunning graphics, while using the atmosphere present in both of these things to help pull you into the world. A game's visuals are ultimately relatively insignificant when compared to the actual gameplay, but that doesn't mean they aren't worthy of being praised. I've spent this entire time so far discussing the most superficial and surface level elements of the game without even talking about how it plays. And while everything previously mentioned does manage to reach an extremely high level of quality, the most important, and by far most impressive elements of the game all lie within its gameplay, and there's a lot to dissect here. I've been talking for quite a while now, so if you want to take a break and come back, now would be the time. Otherwise, let's break down why the gameplay of Dragon's Lair 3D is so incredible. Across all console versions of the game, the camera is controlled exactly the same way. You use the right stick to rotate the camera left, right, up, and down. On the PC version, you're also given the choice of a second control scheme, which I'll call the PC camera as opposed to the console camera. With this one, you use the mouse to turn left and right, and using the A and D key simply moves you left or right along a horizontal axis instead of turning your character left or right as would happen in platforming games. No matter which camera you choose, they both work wonders for the game. They both allow you complete and total control over your camera at all times, and the game never restricts your control over where you're looking during gameplay. It never forces you to look straight at the boss when you want to explore the rest of the room. It never turns the camera for you when you don't want it to be turned. It is always within your control regardless of whether you're using the PC camera or the console camera. There's even a neat little first-person mode you can use if you want to take a second to look around the room, or look up at the menacing castle in front of you, or get a closer look at the enemies around you. Ow! In a game with platforming elements, the camera needs to be in the player's control. It's important to be able to turn the camera in the directions you want it to face so that you can easily make these jumps, or quickly whirl around in case you need to face an enemy flanking you from behind. And thankfully, this game absolutely nails that design. Even outside of how the camera is controlled, your view is never obstructed by walls or other obstacles throughout the levels. There's nothing more frustrating than when you're trying to fight enemies, but the camera keeps getting stuck behind objects or inside walls. Fortunately, this is completely non-existent in Dragon's Lair 3D. The only time it can happen is if you're dealing with a false wall, since that's not technically an obstacle you can bump into. That's why you have the Dragon's Eye, so you can see through those surfaces. But more on that ability later. And in terms of field of view, it's set the perfect distance away from Dirk. It's just close enough to make you feel like you're a part of the action without making it such that you can't even see what's going on. The camera in this game perfects both the feeling of control that the player has over its position, as well as more mechanical elements such as the lack of clipping and FOV. It helps the game feel so much more seamless when you don't have to worry about the camera rotating around in ways you don't want it to, or clipping through random surfaces. As for the movement controls, they're just as flawless as the camera. Dirk is very sensitive to your input, allowing you to make quick adjustments to your positioning on the fly if you're in a sticky situation. He doesn't feel sluggish at any point. He's very responsive, and as a result, jumping around the levels feels very fluid. Jumping is based on your momentum. If you need to make a quick hop up to a ledge, you can. Or if you need to cross a larger gap, you can get a running start to increase your momentum, and that will carry over into your jump. Additionally, if you want to maintain your velocity instead of simply coming to a stop, you can somersault as you're about to land to carry your momentum forward and not lose the sense of speed you had a moment ago. And when we put all these things together, you can pull off some super satisfying series of moves around the levels like what I'm demonstrating here. In addition, it's no secret that there's a lot of stuff you have to manage in this game. Every single button on the controller affects something in the game, which could lead one to assume that the controls will feel very overwhelming to anyone jumping in for the first time. And yet, remarkably, they don't feel that way in the slightest because the game slowly builds you up to having to manage all these different things. It doesn't just drop you into an enemy gauntlet and say, good luck. It starts you off with a basic platforming challenge that escalates in difficulty as you ascend the path to the castle. You gotta learn to walk before you can run. Then from there, they introduce jumping. You see ledges that aren't high enough to land on naturally, which you discover as you try to leap up to it, and in doing so, Dirk grabs the ledge and pulls himself up. The game teaches you that you can grab high ledges from the very first required jump of the game, which is an ability that can serve as a safety net if you just barely miss a jump. This section is followed up immediately by learning how to store momentum for long-range jumps. They give you a little bit of time to get used to these jumping controls before challenging you to combine the basics you learned thus far in one last platforming test before reaching the castle. This tutorial will be a cakewalk for veteran players, but it is an addition that is absolutely necessary to help players get a feel for the controls before the adventure begins proper. Then, after having proven you know how to platform properly, you are faced with your first enemy, an enemy that cannot move from its position, but can still deal damage to you if you get close to it. And this is when the game teaches you how to draw your sword and attack, but does so without any pressing time limit due to the fact that the enemy can't aggressively charge you down. You have to be the one to initiate the combat. You have all the time in the world to learn how to attack. It just sits there patiently, waiting for you to make the choice to manually draw your sword and take it down, just like in the original arcade version, before confidently charging into the castle ready for whatever else the game wants to throw your way. In less than 5 minutes, you've successfully been introduced to basic movement controls, jumping skills, as well as how to attack enemies. And the game taught you all these things in individual segments so you never felt like you were being overloaded with information you didn't have enough time to properly process. For each new mechanic introduced, you have a new set of controls to learn, and if the game had front-loaded you with all this crazy stuff, it would have felt like way too much to handle. But because it starts off super simple, and slowly introduces new mechanics throughout the adventure, by the end of the game you will have perfected every aspect of this game's controls, and that is a result of both a responsive movement and combat system on top of levels that are carefully designed so you have plenty of time to adjust to the previous set of controls before being introduced to something new. This holds true whether you're playing with mouse and keyboard or a controller. Platforming and combat is just as natural to control with both input devices. Except crossbow aiming. This is obviously much easier on PC than a console because there is no aim assist with a controller. While this is common practice for almost every console FPS game available due to the decreased accuracy of joystick movement versus mouse movement, this game was not afforded such a luxury. As you can imagine, this makes aiming very difficult. Fortunately, there is an option present for people like me who have a hard time aiming fast and accurately with a controller without any aim assist, the lock-on button. For both the sword and crossbow, at any point throughout the entire game you can activate this feature. With just one press of a button, your camera will lock onto the nearest enemy, making aiming a breeze. This isn't really necessary on PC due to the mouse being precise enough to make aiming easy to do, but it's greatly appreciated on console. So, whether you choose to play with a mouse and keyboard or with a controller, aiming the crossbow is a breeze. You probably won't even stop to think about it while you're playing because of how natural Dirk feels to control. That's the thing with controls. For the most part, if a game controls well, you won't even notice or think about it at all. It'll feel so natural that you'll be completely immersed into the world and can effortlessly control the character and camera however you like to help accomplish tasks. Then your brain is focused on, how do I use my platforming skills to reach that beam out there, instead of struggling to figure out how to even get a proper grip on the movement controls in the first place. When a game's controls are abysmal, anybody can easily point to why that is and talk about it. But when the controls are good, let alone near perfect, your brain will forget you're manipulating a controller or keyboard and instead feel like you're a part of this world, and Dragons of 3D easily falls into the latter category. Okay, so cool, the game controls like a dream, but what am I controlling Dirk for? What sorts of hijinks will we be getting up to on this adventure? Or in other words, what's the gameplay like? Well, let's get into that. Gameplay in Dragons of 3D consists of a core group of elements: swordplay, crossbow combat, the 5 magical essences in the Ring of Power, and the 10 boss battles. We'll break them down one by one, starting with the swordplay. Since Dirk's only method of defense in the arcade game is his trusty sword, it is also your primary weapon in this game. It can be used to flip switches, break certain objects in the environment to gain access to new areas, destroy barrels which can contain items like health and mana potions, and, of course, it can be used to fight the enemies which stand between you and rescuing Princess Daphne. On a strictly superficial level, every swing of the sword that connects with an enemy delivers an impactful sound effect which, when combined with the visual feedback of enemies rolling backwards or freezing in shock, makes for incredibly satisfying attacks. But of course, it goes deeper than just how good the attacks sound and look. As I'm sure you've noticed, you don't have to be stationary to swing your sword around. You always have the ability to attack even while sprinting at full speed, and your movement isn't penalized in any way for doing so. This creates incredibly fluid gameplay because your sword swings flow directly into one another without any interruptions whatsoever. There aren't any awkward pauses between attacks that make the combat feel sluggish and discontinuous. It's always one fluid, continuous motion instead of a series of jagged, intermittent sword jabs. Now, at first glance, it might seem like the swordplay is no more complex than just wildly swinging your sword around and mowing down everything in your path, but there's far more to it than that, and you have a plethora of options available to you in combat. Some enemies are best defeated with the classic hack and slash tactic, primarily the Giddy Goons. However, there will be instances where there are too many enemies to handle at once, leading them to surround and defeat you. And for more dangerous foes, such as the armored knights and gargoyles armed with very dangerous spears, you will be put at a major risk with even just 2 or 3 of them around you due to their high amounts of damage dealt. This forces you to consider other combat options beyond hacking and slashing. challenging. For instance, the first major upgrade you obtain is the Dragon's Ring, which grants you the Whirlwind Sword attack. This is the only attack in the game that requires you to stop moving entirely to pull off, which does leave you extremely vulnerable to enemy attacks. On top of that, it is severely draining to your mana bar, which is the resource powering all of your essences as well as the specific attack. However, in spite of the risk to your health bar, the move features a satisfying build-up followed by the release of the stored up energy, which will absolutely decimate anything daring enough to get close to you. It is a high-risk, high-reward move that is to be used sparingly due to its resource-heavy nature, but an option worth considering if things get too hectic. You can also try to get higher on enemies and perform a lunge attack, which, while being a slower method of dealing damage, doesn't give the enemies any time to react to your attack before they're stunned from the impact. If you're out of mana and don't have any nearby ledges to lunge down from, you can also try to break up the pack of enemies and lure them away from one another, making them easier to defeat individually. For the Knights and Gargoyles, they have extremely dangerous melee weapons that can take you out very quickly if you get careless, so you are required to try an alternate method of attack. Or, if you're up for the challenge, you can bait them into attacking you, then skillfully flank around behind to attack their weak point while they're distracted. You can even trick enemies into attacking each other, which is extremely comical to watch. The good old-fashioned hack and slash method is more than effective against certain enemies, certainly, but combat isn't always so one-note. You have a plethora of options at your disposal, allowing you to play to your strengths and mix things up depending on the situation, since the enemies all have different strengths, weaknesses, and attack patterns that you can observe and learn from. That wide range of combat options, combined with the satisfying visual feedback and sound effects, on top of the continuous and fluent motion of your swings are what makes swordplay so satisfying. Of course, the sword doesn't work for every occasion. There are a couple enemies that prefer to take to the skies and attack from above, or enemies with long-range weapons that make taking them out with just the sword a major pain. That's where the crossbow comes into play.
Look, a crossbow!
Much like the sword, it can also be used to interact with the levels themselves, activating switches from long range to reveal new passageways and secret areas. But, of course, its primary use is for combat, and fighting with the crossbow is just as satisfying as it is with the sword. Unlike the sword, the crossbow doesn't have a plethora of cool moves you can pull off. It's just a crossbow. You aim, and then you fire. It's that simple. There are two main types of arrows available throughout the game: steel arrows and flame arrows. There's also the magic arrow, which guarantees an instant kill to anything you hit, but it only appears in the final set of levels, it's extremely rare, and its primary use is against the final boss, so I'll hold off on talking about it for now. Steel arrows do a decent amount of damage and are the more plentiful resource out of the two types. Flame arrows, on the other hand, do critical amounts of damage and can take out weaker enemies in a single hit, and stronger enemies in as few as 2. With all that in mind, if all else is held constant, there's obviously no reason to ever use the steel arrows ever again. This is balanced by the amount of flame arrows that are available. You will almost always have less flame arrows than you will steel arrows because they are far less plentiful due to them being more powerful in combat. This simple 2-arrow system is all the game needs to create engaging combat. For one, there's the issue of prioritization. If ammo wasn't an issue, there wouldn't ever be a reason to use the sword ever again. You can just stay a safe distance away from the enemies and pick them all off one at a time with the crossbow. But if you do that, you'll run out of arrows very quickly, thus leaving you utterly defenseless against the ranged enemies. You have to strike a balance between the urge to mow down everything in your path with the crossbow and the necessity to conserve as many arrows as possible for the really strong enemies. Then there's the issue of which arrow you use. There are certain sections where the flame arrow is expressly required to progress the level due to its explosive behavior, but in combat there are no such requirements. The choice of which arrow you load into the crossbow is entirely up to you. Do you use all the steel arrows against the weaker enemies and preserve the flame arrows for the big guys since they're much stronger, or do you use the flame arrows against the little guys since they'll go down in one hit and save the steel arrows for the bigger guys since you'll naturally have more ammo to spare for that type of arrow? There is no necessarily correct answer to this question because just like with the swordplay, the decision is entirely up to you and you are free to play to your strengths. Another thing to consider is that ammo count won't be consistent for each player. For those who want to explore every last nook and cranny of the castle, they're naturally going to find more supply caches and will therefore have more options available to them during combat. But if the player doesn't care about exploration and is more focused on the combat and progressing the story forward, they won't have nearly as many arrows to work with and will have to be much more judicious about when they choose to fire their crossbow and with which arrow they choose to do so. Crossbow combat may not be as dynamic as the swordplay due to it having less options in execution, but it still offers pivotal gameplay choices throughout the adventure due to the different arrow types. And, of course, the immediate dissipation of the enemies combined with the impactful sound effects make for yet another satisfying weapon for Dirk to use. Also, you can switch between these two weapons anytime you're on the ground, even while moving, allowing for you to quickly adjust your attack plan and use something else in your arsenal if you need to. Speaking of which, that arsenal doesn't solely consist of weapons. He also has 5 super important essences in his inventory: the Dragon's Wing, the Dragon's Spirit, the Dragon's Eye, the Dragon's Scale, and the Dragon's Flame, all bound together by the Dragon's Ring of Power. Let's go through them one by one. The Dragon's Wing grants you the power of flight. From either a stationary position or following a running jump, you can leap off the ground and start to glide through the air whatever you want. And once you obtain it, you can use your newfound flight abilities to explore previously inaccessible areas. This pit you couldn't cross before, easily traversable now. This is also the first of a plethora of instances throughout the game where you can glide to hidden ledges or alcoves in search of hidden treasures. Of course, this flight isn't without its risks. For one, it can't be used to bypass entire levels. For as long as you're gliding, you will slowly start to lose mana. Every essence in the game will consume anywhere from a little bit to a lot of mana dependent on the strength of the ability to prevent players from abusing them. And if you run out of mana while gliding, you'll drop like a stone. Additionally, you need to keep an eye out for certain enemies. Any flying dragonlings, ghoulies, or even stationary giddy-goons can effortlessly snipe you out of the air if you aren't careful, meaning you have to be sure the skies are clear before you take flight. Now, before I can discuss the next essence, I need to quickly discuss healing in this game. Typically, there are two types of ways to heal, with health orbs dropped by enemies and containers hidden throughout the levels, or with the use of potions. The former is a reward for exploring the levels and offers an immediate effect, but you will also never find them during boss battles or during major encounters, meaning they can't be used to heal you if your health goes down during combat. Potions, on the other hand, carry a risk versus reward system with them. If you're in the middle of an intense battle and need to quickly heal, your only option in early game is to use one of your health potions. However, this isn't an instantaneous thing, it takes time to take effect. On top of that, Dirk can't drink the potion while running, leaving him completely vulnerable to any attacks throughout the healing process. If you're successful, your health will be restored and you can get right back to the fight. But if not, and you're attacked while healing, the enemies can take away even more health and completely nullify the decision to use the potion, or even worse, lead to your death. You need to find an opportunity during battles where you can safely hide away and drink, or look for an opening in a boss's attack pattern when it's safe to do so. This risk versus reward system adds an incredible amount of tension to battles, especially if you only have a limited amount of potions. But the Dragon Spirit introduces a third option for healing, and it is by far the most powerful. It combines the immediate feedback of the health containers with the ability to use it during battle that the potions offer. However, there's one major difference. Even if you only need to restore a small amount of health, your mana count will almost be entirely cut in half. And if you need to do a full heal, you won't have any mana left after that. It's a very resource heavy ability, meaning you have to preserve it for absolute worst case scenarios. If you decide to use the Dragon Spirit just because it's quicker to do so, even though a potion could have restored the same amount of health, you will lose a lot of mana instantly and thus limit your options in combat due to the inability to use things such as the Whirlwind Sword attack. And while you can increase your maximum mana counter throughout the game, you can also increase your maximum health counter, meaning that using the Dragon Spirit is still a big risk to your mana bar. So, despite how powerful the essence is at first glance, it perfectly complements the risk versus reward system present with standard healing potions, and introduces yet another strategic option the player can use to their advantage in combat. The Dragon's Eye is very straightforward in its functionality. Activating it allows you to identify false walls present throughout the castle. In the hub area prior to the level where you find this essence, if you explore the area enough, you can find two strange walls with these little eye symbols next to them. They mean absolutely nothing to the player until they obtain the Dragon Eye. Once it's in your inventory, you realize that you're stuck in a room with no visible doors, and you don't know exactly what this new essence does. So your instinct is to activate it to see what it does. And when you do, you suddenly gain a whole new perspective on the world around you and discover a hidden doorway next to that same symbol you saw before lying on the ground. That's when it clicks. You go back to confirm your theory and discover that you can, in fact, pass right through the wall with the use of the Dragon Eye. There is a plethora of these false walls all throughout the castle concealing treasures, health upgrades, and mana upgrades, and this essence grants you the ability to see through them, even further encouraging exploration of the castle. The Dragon skill makes you immune to fire. Not lava, nothing in the game is strong enough to withstand the broiling hot lava, but it does allow you to safely traverse inflamed areas without fear. Streaks of fire can't touch you, fireplaces won't burn you by accident if you hop into it, and you can navigate areas engulfed in a fiery atmosphere because without the dragon scale, yeah. While this essence does grant gameplay benefits in the form of defense against flame-based attacks and environmental hazards, it also allows for even more exploration opportunities, much like the Dragon's Wing and Dragon's Eye, due to the ability to seamlessly pass through the fire, which becomes very important in the game's final set of rooms where things start to really heat up, both figuratively and literally. And finally, we have the Dragon's Flame, granting you a permanent fire sword. While this does give you the ability to essentially carry a torch around through dimly lit caverns, the more important thing is that it gives you a major damage boost, being able to take out weaker enemies with a single swing of the sword. Whereas you previously had to seek out fireplaces to get a flame sword, now that ability is available in your inventory with just a single push of a button. But just like everything else, it comes at a cost to your mana. You can't keep this activated for the entire game because you will run out of mana, and this is the last essence you find throughout the adventure, which means that at this point, your inventory has almost entirely been filled to capacity, and you have all these different essences available to you, which you need to be able to switch between multiple times on the fly. You'll need to use the Dragon Eye to search for secret passages, the Dragon's Wing to navigate the platforms within these passages, the Dragon's Skill to withstand nearby heat, and the Dragon Spirit to withstand any danger that you face along the way. When you combine all of that with the Dragon Flame, it means that you have a lot of different things to keep track of at once during gameplay, and all of them drain your mana supply quite a bit. And restoring your mana is done the same way as your health, either with hidden containers or with potions, which also utilizes the same risk versus reward system as healing. You need to learn to prioritize certain enemies when using the Flame Sword to make sure you still have enough mana left to navigate the rest of the obstacles the castle tries to throw at you, especially since some enemies can only be defeated with the Flame Sword. And properly balancing all these essences together in conjunction with your health and mana is a process that can take some getting used to, but it proves to be incredibly rewarding once you master the power of the essences. Some of these essences benefit the game's exploration by allowing you to use the abilities gained from them to reach new areas, and the others expand the combat by offering even more choices both defensively and offensively. but fundamentally they both accomplish the same task, giving more options for the player. The pattern you've likely spotted throughout every aspect of the gameplay thus far is the freedom of choice, the wide array of sword moves you can pull off, the importance of deciding when to use the crossbow and with what arrow, and the freedom of level exploration with all the essences at your disposal, as well as the option to heal quickly or gain bonus damage while heavily draining resources. Dragon's Lair 3D doesn't force you to play a certain way, it allows you to play around with these mechanics however you like, which is the core reason for why this gameplay holds up so well almost 20 years later. Wait, this game's gonna be 20 years old? What the hell? So now, let's see how all these elements tie together in some of the game's most challenging sections, the boss fights. The main levels all provide a playground for you to improve in your combat and platforming skills, and then when you reach the boss battles, they put the skills you've learned to the test alongside other gameplay elements to see if you can best them in combat. Some bosses test your pattern recognition and platforming skills. Some do so in conjunction with a simple amount of puzzle solving or crossbow skills, and some are designed to be your equal in every way, meaning that they're capable of almost everything you are in addition to being able to transform into other enemies. Each boss tests something different in their own unique way, but there are 3 battles I want to draw specific attention to: the Cyclops Worm, the Lizard King, and Mordroc. The Cyclops Worm requires you to use the Flame Arrow to stun it, followed by the sword to actually deal damage to it, in addition to either finding an opportunity to use health potions or very meticulously managing the Dragon Spirit in the hopes that it can get you through the battle. Because with the amount of worms down here, this battle is almost impossible without some form of healing. Almost, but not quite. It's a test of your crossbow skills, swordplay skills, as well as resource management all at once while surrounded by a sea of unrelentingly aggressive and dangerous enemies. The Lizard King is a 3-phase experience. The initial enemy to clear out, the chase sequence to retrieve your weapons, and the climactic battle to hold onto your sword just long enough to defeat the boss. During the first phase, you'll be subconsciously committing the different twists and turns of the path to memory. You'll know which paths are dead ends and which aren't, which will allow you to focus on chasing down the pot of gold in the second phase since you already know your way around these halls. These first 2 phases test your route memorization skills in conjunction with some small platforming challenges. The final phase, meanwhile, is a combat challenge unlike any you've previously faced, because once you trap the pot in this room, you may be able to retrieve your sword, but it can also take it right back from you. With that in mind, this area is a test of your patience. You need to wait for the pot of gold and Lizard King to get close enough to each other so you can quickly grab your weapons and deal as much damage as possible before you lose your sword again, creating an incredibly satisfying back and forth battle where you try to lure them close together so you can get your hits in and ultimately defeat the Lizard King. Well, unless you glitch out the AI by hiding in the corner, preventing either enemy from being able to reach you. Yeah, this is a bit strange. Mordroc is the ultimate test of your skills. As you've gained new weapons, upgrades, and essences over the course of the game, you've come to rely on them. You've come to know that they'll always be there for you to fall back on if you need to. But from the second you step into this arena, amulet in hand, all that assurance is immediately ripped away from you as Mordroc takes the essences for himself. You no longer have a Dragon's Wing to act as a last resort if you fall off the ledge. You can't rely on the Dragon Spirit to quickly heal you if things get hectic. You don't have the extra damage from the Dragon's Flame. Everything you've come to accept as just another tool in your backpack has been taken away, and now you have to face off against the final boss of the game with nothing more than your sword and your crossbow. No essences will be around to save you this time, which means that now you have to go back to the basics of combat to vanquish the most dangerous foe yet. You'll have to manage electric dragon lanes both up close and personal with your sword and from a distance with a crossbow. You have to snipe the boss himself with a magic arrow, and you have to do all this while properly platforming over the lasers Mordroc is firing down upon you and searching for safe times to heal during battle, serving as the ultimate test of your skill and the perfect capstone of this adventure. Each boss functions as both a faithful callback to the original arcade game and as a tightly crafted battle testing a different skill each time. The reason they're all so engaging to fight against is because of how well all the different gameplay elements work together. They offer you a wide array of different ways to fight the enemies, giving you a plentiful number of tools for use in exploring the levels, and allow you to choose from many different playstyles to help tailor the experience to your own strengths. You're never forced into getting aggressive or staying back from a distance. The choice is entirely up to you, and your options will be widened or narrowed based on your level of exploration and amount of resources required, which is the fundamental reason why this game's mechanics function so well. All of these things offer engaging and satisfying gameplay all on their own, but Dragonstone takes things a step further by putting the choice in the player's hands. It's the fact that all these different elements work together to provide the player with many different ways to fight the enemies and navigate the levels that makes the game so engaging and rewarding. Up close and personal or long range, brute force and heal heavy, or meticulous and deftly mobile. No matter your playstyle, no matter your strikes, the game gives you all the tools you need to play how you want, and you'll have an absolute blast navigating this treacherous castle and tackling every obstacle it throws your way to try to knock you down. Okay, so sure, the gameplay is great, but another important question to ask is, how well are the levels designed? I already went over how the levels stand out from one another aesthetically, but what about in terms of gameplay? Well, Dragon's Lair 3D has it all. Out of the core gameplay elements, we have standard combat, puzzle solving, chase sequences or other time-sensitive events, and platforming tests. On top of styling each of these gameplay challenges around the theming of an area you're currently exploring, such as solving a sound-based puzzle in the bell towers but a mechanical-based puzzle in the smithy sections, or jumping across geysers in a lava world as opposed to traversing rafts across a creepy lake in the haunted sections, the game also paces them out such that you're never stuck repeating the same task too many times. If you finish a level that's entirely centered around platforming skills, you'll be followed up with one all about puzzles and combat. If you emerge victorious from from a grueling boss battle, you'll have some time to relax with a platforming challenge. You're never stuck solving a gauntlet of puzzles back to back to back, or fighting endless waves of enemies with nothing to break up the pacing of these sections, which is how the game prevents the levels from blending into one another, by making sure there's always a good balance between the different types of gameplay so things never become repetitive. As far as their actual design is concerned, the majority of levels in this game are very linear. You start in one room, and navigate through a few more before finding the exit door to the next level. Linearity isn't inherently a bad thing. Depending on the type of game, it can help keep the adventure streamlined so that you don't get lost and stumble around blindly looking for your next objective. On the other hand, if something is too linear, it can often feel like you're just walking down a predetermined path with no opportunity for player expression and choice because levels are too streamlined. It's critically important to strike a proper balance when crafting more linear levels. And a mark of excellent level design is when a game can make you completely forget that they're designed in a linear fashion. There are certainly levels with a string of small-scale rooms to navigate, but there's also a plethora of rooms that feel like a museum with how open they are and how much there is to see and do. Let's take a look at an example so I can show you what I'm talking about. In the sewer depths level, you start off with a basic rope swinging challenge to cross the initial pit of goo. Upon landing, you encounter a door guarded by a green lock, meaning you'll have to locate a green key if you want to open it. So you head through the door on the platform immediately behind you and start to explore, fighting your way past the dragonlings and dodging toxic mist in the process. You locate the green key, but also find an empty mana cell stand next to a massive pit of ooze, preventing you from reaching what you assume to be the exit door. And on your way back to the locked door, you see a mana cell being guarded by some worms. But if you try to defeat them, you'll find out that you can't, because they'll just spring right back up again. So now you have a new objective. Find a way to get past those worms so you can get the mana cell and reach the exit. And the only way to do that is to use your previously located key to access a new room and climb your way to the top to drain the water, solving some puzzles and fighting some enemies along the way, thus eliminating the worms and allowing you to take the mana cell to the end and exit the room. Technically speaking, this level is a linear mission. You can shift the location to a series of small rooms connected by narrow hallways with the same order of objectives. Go through a room, get key to open door, travel through different room to drain water, then place mana cell, and leave. But the developers chose instead to place these objectives throughout the level in an order which leads you as the player to come up with solutions on your own. The nature of the tasks at hand, getting the key, draining the water, and moving the mana cell, leads you to traverse all different corners of the sewer depths, searching every nook and cranny for the collectibles at hand until you finally have all the pieces you need to move on. As I said, this is a linear set of objectives when you really break it down, but because of how expansive the level is, you're so swept up in the wonder of exploring it and searching for the items you need that you don't even notice the linearity of it. And to be clear, there are many instances where the game really opens up and your exploration opportunities are limitless. The best example of this is the Impossible Room about halfway through the game. You could spend all day here checking out all the little nooks and crannies, exploring every doorway, and being mesmerized by every insane visual effect meant to boggle your mind. Since this is a hub level serving as a jumping off point to enter other levels, there is still a door you ultimately have to pass through to proceed with the rest of the game. But you're never required to make a beeline straight for that door. You're free to explore the Impossible Room to your heart's desire in search of treasures and can even find multiple different paths to reach the exit. You don't feel crammed into a hallway or a string of tiny rooms. You feel like an adventurer exploring every square inch of this marvelous castle. And that is entirely because whether the level in question is linear in nature like the sewer depths or an open-ended playground like the Impossible Room, you feel like you're the one choosing to explore these locations throughout your journey. Another way the game helps to achieve this effect is through the use of subtle details in the rooms to help guide you in the right direction without ever having to tell you to do so. The game doesn't have giant blinking arrows saying, "Hey! Go over there!" But it also doesn't leave you without any directional guidance whatsoever. You can see torches indicating which platforms are safe to jump on, a light shining in the distance so you always know which door is the exit, barrels stacked in front of doors encouraging you to explore other directions so you don't encounter something you can't pass yet, markings on the ground letting you know where not to step while dodging flying fireballs, torches tinted certain colors to help indicate a sense of danger in certain directions. The game is full of these little details that all help guide you along the proper path of your adventure without directly pointing you in the right direction. The game tricks you into thinking that you've chosen these paths yourself, successfully making you forget all about the linear nature of the levels and creates open-ended environments to help drive home that idea even further. Now, with all that said, one aspect of the level design that cannot go unmentioned is, unfortunately, the traps. There are a couple instances throughout the game where you'll encounter something that will kill you instantly with little to no warning, like this. Now, there are two types of these traps, the predictable and the unpredictable. An example of the former would be these bookcases. The game forcibly stops your movement when you make it to this ledge, demonstrating that some of them can topple over and crush you if you aren't careful. In addition, you can see some mystical particles floating on top of the bookcase that nearly crushed you. The same particles floating around every other moving bookcase in the library. These are noticeably absent from the next bookcase ahead, but they are floating in front of the one closest to the exit hole. With this information, we can deduce that only the bookcases with magical particles will topple and can stick to the right side to safely traverse the walkway and avoid getting squished. This trap can be spotted by the player and avoided with a little bit of creative platforming. Others, however, aren't quite as forgiving. For instance, these coffins. These arrows look real tempting, right? Well, there is absolutely no way for the player to reasonably predict that was going to happen. There's also this, and this, and this, and this one too. Don't forget about this one. Yeah, so remember when I said this game was near perfect? Well, these traps are the reason why that's the case instead of it being completely flawless. Obviously, the traps are a deliberate design choice by the developers, not a result of incompetence. They clearly wanted to pay homage to the original Dragon's Lair, which featured a myriad of dangerous traps which the player had an extremely small window of time to react to, in addition to there being plenty of objects that seemed incredibly tempting but would result in death if you tried to obtain them. But that doesn't mean they have to be in Dragon's Lair 3D. However, these traps are by no means game-ruining additions. I showed you every single unpredictable trap in the entire game in a matter of seconds, and in a game that can take anywhere from 4 to 7 hours to complete, that is a very small ratio. Plus, on one of my 2 recent playthroughs for this video, I tested the aforementioned unpredictable insta-kill traps, and for every single one, I was only sent back a matter of seconds from right before I triggered the trap. And this can be even further mitigated since the game lets you save whenever you want outside of boss battles. So you may feel a momentary sense of frustration upon encountering one of these, but that will wash away just as soon as it arrived once you realize that you can basically pick up right where you left off with no consequence whatsoever. By contrast, traps which could be easily detected, or at the very least traps which you learn to detect based on the color of the torch early and then can accurately predict their presence throughout the rest of the maze, carried a much greater penalty, sending me back to the very start of the room in some instances. So while the developers did make a conscious effort to include these traps, they also made the conscious choice to make the ones that were unpredictable almost entirely penalty-free. This is likely because the developers wanted to create some haha, get tricked moments for the player to experience without unfairly penalizing you for walking into a trap that was impossible to foresee. Plus, some of the traps are direct references to the original arcade game, which only goes to further support that theory. So in short, are they necessary features of the game? Not at all. Is the game made better by their inclusion? Nope. However, the player is only significantly punished by the traps which can be easily anticipated. The ones that are a bit more obscure or completely impossible to recognize only set the player back a matter of seconds. So while they definitely could have been cut from the game entirely, their presence doesn't significantly impact the game's overall quality due to a lack of penalty for falling for them. And since we're sorta on the topic, one final thing worth pointing out is the faithfulness to the original arcade game. While Dragon's Lair 3D features far more new environments than does adaptations of the original rooms, it's only natural that this remake would feature the most memorable scenes from the arcade classic. You know, the burning ropes, the pool room, the haunted hallways, the elevator to the throne room, the rolling balls, and, of course, all the classic bosses throughout the game. Dragon's Lair 3D would have functioned just fine without these recreations. As we've established, every level is incredibly well designed all on their own and they didn't need these references to function. But their inclusion adds another element to the experience and strikes an incredibly nostalgic chord with everyone who played the original arcade game. Even without the nostalgia element, the levels offer expansive, engaging, and diverse environments to explore for everyone who plays them, irrespective of their familiarity with the franchise. And as the cherry on top, the rooms all have a plethora of collectibles scattered around. Some of them are simply bonus treasures which unlock cheats if you find them all, while others are items beneficial to gameplay such as health and mana potions. And they're not all just placed in plain sight for the player to collect. Some of them are, most certainly, but a lot of them require you to pay close attention to the environment around you to search for hidden caches. Interesting, there's another burnt out torch. I saw one of these earlier and I could attack it to close the floor trap. Can I do the same thing here? Oh wow, I can. You know, it looks like I should be able to walk down there. Do you think if I follow the path, I'll find a secret? Whoa, awesome. Hey, those beams look wide enough to stand on and the chains are pretty close to them. Maybe if I just, hey, look at that. 2 of these chimneys aren't on fire. Wonder if I can, oh wow, what do you know? And that's not even mentioning the plethora of hidden passages behind false walls you can access once you obtain the Dragon's Eye. I've mentioned some of my favorite examples here, but I don't want to spoil all of them. I want to leave the rest for you to discover on your own. There's also plenty of instances outside of collectible gathering where you have multiple different ways to go through a level and it's up to you to choose your path. These additions all help to encourage exploration, but there's one example that is so well constructed I want to draw special attention to it here. In this room, you encounter a knight statue. It's completely harmless, but the problem is that you can clearly see that there's something special hidden in the wall, and the knight's blocking you from obtaining it with no way for it to be moved. Left with no choice, you move on to the next room where you discover the mana cell, a device that unlocks magical energy all around the castle. And you immediately see the effects of this thing when you take it from the throne room and 2 knights suddenly spring to life and attack you. It's made crystal clear that the mana cell is the thing that brought these statues to life, but the camera conceals them in such a way where you don't actually see the knights until they start moving. As such, this comes as a surprise to many first-time players, and their mind is occupied only with the thought of defeating this new and dangerous enemy before they get the jump on you. Once you do, the normal next step is to pick up the mana cell and continue through the next door to bring it back to the atrium. But here's the thing. Those statues didn't just spawn in from nowhere. They were standing outside the throne room the whole time, waiting to be reawakened by the mana cell. However, a lot of players don't string together what happened either because they didn't see the statues on the way in because they blend in well with the wall textures, or because they were too preoccupied with trying to stay alive after the fact to properly think it through. But for any player that did notice the statues and realize what happened, they have a critical new piece of information. The mana cell can bring statues to life. So, what happens if we bring the mana cell back into the previous room? The statue comes to life and moves out of the way, allowing you to somersault into the secret passage and retrieve the health container. This is why the hidden caches work so well, because none of them are essential to the game's completion. You can play through the entire adventure without ever collecting a single piece of treasure and still enjoy the gameplay. You can also complete the game without collecting any of the additional potions scattered around the castle. I recently completed a run where I didn't seek out or use any health or mana potions, and it was certainly a much greater challenge than playing normally, but it was absolutely doable with enough persistence. But if you do seek out those hidden caches, you are rewarded for doing so. This is how the levels in this game are designed. Straightforward enough so that you can always reasonably figure out how to solve the puzzles and navigate the rooms, while still being open-ended enough to encourage exploration and offer great gameplay benefits to reward the player for thinking outside the box and seeking out these caches. All these elements combine together to create a damn near flawless experience. The gameplay itself strikes a perfect balance between fast-paced, engaging action and slower-paced puzzle solving or exploration. The controls are fluid and to the point where you don't even have to think about your movement and can just focus on the gameplay. And the levels are all diverse in both their design and art theming, preventing the player from feeling like the rooms all blend together while making their way through the castle. It's almost unbelievable how well this game functions. And yet, in spite of everything I've just analyzed, almost nobody talks about this game. Sure, there are a handful of YouTubers who have played through it, but they're few and far between. You don't see anybody praising this game as one of the best that has ever been made, or even the best of its genre. And to be honest, as someone who wasn't even alive when Dragon's Lair was in the arcades, it's heartbreaking to see that this game has been completely lost to time. It's a damn shame that this game is practically unheard of. Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, the Halo Saga, the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney trilogy, and Cuphead are all absolutely outstanding video games that I love to death, and Dragon's Lair 3D Return to the Lair easily stands above them all. Strictly as a reimagining, it takes the beloved characters, story, memorable rooms, and enemy encounters of the original arcade classic and translates them all into an enriching 3D environment. The game modifies these encounters slightly to make them applicable to a full-length 3D video game while still remaining 100% faithful to the content of the original. But even if you have no prior experience with the franchise, Dragon's Lair 3D still excels in its design almost 2 decades after its release. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this game is the absolute best I've ever played. Its beautiful cel-shaded art style holds up remarkably well to this day. The story serves its initial purpose in providing context to the gameplay, and when it needs to reveal its major twists, it does so brilliantly, culminating in an epic climax and satisfying victorious cutscene. The camera is responsive and always in your control while also providing a lock-on option if you need it. Dirt controls perfectly at all times. The levels never fail to impress with a variety of unique environments which both welcome and reward exploration. Combat is fluid with both the sword and crossbow, and you have a variety of options available to you with different arrow choices and powerful resource-heavy essences easily accessible with the press of a button. Bosses all offer creative arenas to fight them in with equally inventive mechanics to take them down. Voice acting is excellent across the board, with each character bringing the appropriate voice to the table even when they don't have any actual lines of dialogue, and every musical track in this game is massively composed, perfectly eliciting the mood of whatever environment you're exploring. At first glance, you wouldn't think that a 3D remake of a 2D arcade game could possibly perfect so many elements, which may have something to do with why this game is so unheard of nowadays. Outside of being playable at E3, I don't think this game had any major marketing campaigns going for it. So maybe people saw this game on store shelves, dismissed it as a shameless cash grab of a remake or a cheap port, and then just moved on with their day without ever giving it a chance. Because the thing is, a majority of the reviews of this game are pretty positive, and even IGN gave this game a fairly high rating. Except for GameSpot, but we all know how great they are at reviewing video games.
In one section of the puzzle, all you need to do is stand on a button, and that button opens a gate for you to bowl a bubble into so you can progress. The only problem is that during SpongeBob's wind-up animation for bowling, he walks forward. That means you fall off of the button, which closes the gate and prevents you from bowling the bubble where you intended, when you intended.
Just take a few steps back, please. Literal preschoolers could figure this out. Let's listen to some other people.
This might not be for anyone who really doesn't appreciate the humor, but it is definitely a hidden gem.
Overall, they were quite successful in recreating a fully rendered 3D version of this world we know and love.
At first I thought it was just going to be a terrible redoing of the game, but, you know, it's pretty fun.
There's some pretty unique things in this game, and it's actually fun trying to overcome a lot of the platforming challenges and the trial and error, of course, of avoiding the traps. So, you know, I would recommend Dragon's Lair 3D.
See what I mean? For the most part, the people who know about this game and have played it seem to have enjoyed it. It's just that it doesn't get anywhere near the attention that it deserves. So then, with all that said, if anything you saw in this video intrigued you even a little bit, then I encourage you to check this game out for yourself. If you've never heard of the game prior to today, I hope I've convinced you to play it for yourself. If you've previously had a negative impression of the game, then I hope that you will reconsider giving it a shot. Because I wholeheartedly believe that if more people knew about this game, it would have a reputation rivaling other beloved 3D action-adventure titles like Ocarina of Time. Because of that, I do sincerely hope that I've been able to convince at least a couple people that this game is worth playing. And if I have convinced you of that, then I genuinely hope you enjoy playing it and maybe even end up loving it just as much as I do. Dragonstone Software truly created something outstanding with this game, and I've wanted to make a video praising it to the ends of the earth for years now. I'd like to think I brought a small amount of attention to the game with my walkthrough, but I wanted to make a much more comprehensive video breaking down why the mechanics, story, and presentation all work so well. And now, I've finally done it. Even if I only convinced a couple people to play this incredible game, then I'd say I accomplished my mission. And if there's one thing that should be clear above all else, it's that I love this obscure little game with all my heart. Some of my earliest gaming memories are of watching my dad playing both the original Dragon's Lair and Return to the Lair. Even when I was too young to physically hold the controller, I was still able to sit beside him and experience the wonders of the castle for the first time ever. I distinctly remember the moment he beat Singe the Dragon, and we were absolutely gobsmacked when we found that there was still an entire half of a game left to beat, or helping him beat the Deathly Discs, or watching the end credits roll as we celebrated our victory, or a million other memories I've made playing games with family and friends over the years. As far as I'm concerned, this video is dedicated to my dad, because without him, even if I had discovered Dragon's Lair on my own, I probably would never become as passionate about it as I am. And if I didn't have the passion to do so, then I never would have taken the time to really analyze Dragon's Lair 3D and figure out why it works so well as a game, which means this video would never have been made in the first place. I am eternally grateful to my dad for introducing this wonderful franchise to me. I am eternally grateful to Dragonstone Software for the memories they gave me in the game they created, and I hope that this video will encourage someone else to go play the game and make their own memories with it. I wanted to do something really special to celebrate this game's anniversary, so I poured my heart and soul into working to get this out on time, redrafting the script and polishing the timeline around the clock to make as good of an analysis as I possibly could. I hope I succeeded in bringing more attention to this absolute masterpiece of a video game, because I owe it to Dragonstone Software for making something so incredible and giving me so many memories. So, in the words of the behind-the-scenes host Dave Hood, to Rick Dyer, Don Bluth, Gary Goldman, John Pomeroy, and the entire creative team at Dragonstone, thanks for 20 years of fun. And we're all looking forward to 20 years more. So happy anniversary, Dragon's Lair 3D, and thanks for watching.